So a state representative, not federal, not industry, not academia. I see some friendly faces in the audience. I hope none of you will be converted to adversaries at the end of the discussion. And welcome to the Commonwealth partners and Ukraine and Japan for being here. Like you, I am a problem owner. And I'm hoping that everyone in the audience will encourage the guy on my left and the guy on my right to answer all your questions about how they are going to solve the problems that we share in cybersecurity through collective something, collective partnership, collective communication, collective sharing, collective defense, collective security. So I was given 10 questions, which I was told to ask, and I left them at the hotel. So we're gonna figure it out, if that's all right, General.
Yes.
And Rich. Okay, Rich, just to set the stage for everybody here, you and I have known each other a long time. You were in the Navy, I was in the Navy. You saw the light and got in industry quicker than I did. You've had a very successful career. You've come to and from government service a couple times. You retired also out of the reserves. You recently were back in U.S. federal service at a very, very senior level. What is the one biggest thing that you've seen change in terms of solving problems?
Well, I actually believe that we are actually sharing information well. And what I mean by that is if I go back all those years, all the way back to PDD 63, Clinton administration, when the whole information sharing concept got established, and the journey that we've been on, right, with the state ISACs, the industry ISACs, and then the dependency of the critical infrastructure and the government acknowledge of that. So I've watched information sharing mature, and I think the information is there. So I think it's positive. The opportunity that still exists now is the action associated with the information that we're sharing.
Okay, so General, good to see you again.
Yes, sir.
Brief introduction for those who don't know. You started out in the Army. You transitioned to the private sector, stayed in the reserves.
Right.
You did stuff at a very high level with data science and analytics. You still do that while you're not on recall orders or active duty orders. Right. And what you help the J2 at U.S. Cyber Command do is solve personnel challenges, right? Bringing talent out of the private sector that are doing reserve duty and other augmentation capabilities and bring that to the analytics stack at U.S. Cyber Command. Do I kind of have that right?
Right. And that's one thing that we've realized at especially U.S. Cyber Command, since we share so much of that with the commercial world as far as networks and protected networks and security. A lot of your talent resides in the Guard and Reserve because most of those individuals either work for IT security companies, they work for private industry where they have those certifications and they understand the threats and the problems that we're facing as well.
Okay. So when we use these terms like collective security, what does that mean to the Department of Defense, the Department of War, and the armed forces?
So, for prior to cyber becoming its own domain and everything, prior to that, the military fought overseas. And so we're always worrying about our mobilization or deployments and stuff like that in other theaters. Well, once we started looking back now with the cyber threats, we start seeing the fact of we're very dependent on critical infrastructure that we don't own, such as power generation, some of our communication networks, water, all those others that enable us to mobilize and move forward. So once we started peeling that apart, we started saying, hey, you know what? A threat to my network, which is what Cyber Command number one mission is, protect the Department of War information networks, is dependent also on what private industry is doing, since we use that as a backbone as well. So with 85% of critical infrastructure being privately owned, we better have a collective plan to prepare and defend all those networks, all those capabilities together.
Okay, so Rich, I'm a little intrigued, right? Because I think I too remember not too long ago, but it seems increasingly longer, my time in uniform, where I think the U.S. military machine would say yes, our goal, of course, is to fight the away game, right? To go elsewhere so we don't have to do the homeland defense game.
Right.
Right. But you're going to rely on infrastructure, as you pointed out. And Rich, your industry, right? Your sector, that's the base layer, right? So what are you guys doing to both protect the global commons, but also to enable, or what should we do to enable what the Department of Defense and our allies require?
Yeah, I mean, TJ, the whole idea of, the dependency on the public-private collaboration, right? And the acknowledgement that, hey, as a country, as a warfighting machine, we depend on our critical infrastructure and our ability to have resilient infrastructure. So from a telecommunication industry standpoint, we've taken that extremely seriously. So about 2 years ago, we instituted an information sharing agreement where we got some U.S. entities, Canada, we've got Japan, we've got Australia, we've got the UK, we've got Germany, we've got Spain, and we knocked down some of the legal barriers that are traditionally associated with commercial companies sharing information and established this group. And this group, now we meet. Every month, our operators get together. They're sharing tools and techniques that they're sharing around the world, right? Because this adversary, right, the adversary of cyber, isn't centric to the U.S., isn't centric to any country, right? It's geographically dispersed. So what they might see in Australia before we see could be of value to us. What they see in Germany could be of value before. So we've actually coordinated that, and then we took it one step further, and just this month, we announced the Communications Cybersecurity Sharing Analysis Center, the C2ISAC, which collectively now we've established a traditional nonprofit where right now there's 8 U.S. companies, and our plan is to expand that out. But to have that infrastructure to support exactly what you said is what will the communications infrastructure do during a time of crisis? What we need to do is obviously have a rallying point, which obviously could be virtual in nature, streamlined playbooks, understanding tools available to us, and be working very closely and partnering with not just other industries, but also the government.
Okay, so that C2 ISAC is a creation of the industry, and it's separate from the CISA organized or managed, sector risk management.
Correct.
ISACs, is that right?
That 100% correct. Yes.
Okay, so what is the hoped for relationship between the C2 ISAC, very narrowly and deliberately in industry creation, and then in the case of the U.S., the telecommunications sector?
Okay. So our direction in our charter is we are going to establish an appropriate information sharing mechanism, right? Not just Slack channel, right? As an example, that will enable anybody in the ISAC, right, to be able to communicate and share. We'll figure out how that then also, provides an interface, not just to the U.S. government, right, to any appropriate government, so that information sharing can go both ways and the timeliness. But in addition to that, also, what can we do to help the industry? So I'll give you an example. We've taken on this idea of trying to address resident proxies, right? We talk about collective defense. Resident proxies is an issue which bad actors take advantage of. There are some limitations there of things we can and can't do, right, as telecommunication providers. But there are authorities available, to the Bureau and other entities that can potentially enable. But our view is if it's just one entity going after residential proxy or any other campaign, more than likely it's dispersed. So now with this global perspective, right, we could really do some disruption on some of these bad actor campaigns and maybe eliminate them, or more importantly, make it harder for them to get established going forward. And then one step further to that, to really, the ISAC wants to be very operationally focused. We also have a telecommunications, basically cyber range exercise every year. We hosted our first one last year. We'll do another one this year where we had teams from those entities that had that information sharing agreement in place came in and war gamed for a game. And actually, last year was the first time that we created the wargaming entity created a collaboration cell, which means you got points for sharing information and then you got points for utilizing the information, right? So again, as you know, in exercises, you can talk about it and then you can do it. So the actual collaboration, the teams got points for. So the hope is obviously that will now be part of, basically standard practice when any entity is dealing with an issue.
So does DHS, CISA, and the Department of War play in that war game?
Not yet. Part of that was in the first one. Can you imagine if you're like, Spain, Germany, UK, and suddenly, Cyber Command and Department of War are playing just in the US, right? We would need to make sure that this is more, kind of more, Five Eyes or more globally, to allow that to happen.
You could include Texas any time that you want, just selfishly.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah,
we should do that.
Okay, so what do you guys need? What is the J2 at U.S. Cyber Command? Like, what kind of relationship and distinguishing between data feeds and knowledge sharing? How would you like to see that unfold?
Well, and again, when you opened it in the beginning, the collaboration has grown so much since even the first time I got in, and especially started working in this domain. And it's a very big emphasis now on the industry and the states and everybody else who facilitates this. So I think just the information sharing alone, when we go forward, we do hunt forwards where we look with our allies, we look with our partners, we see what's affecting them. We'll take those techniques that the adversary may be using and we'll go through a Homeland Security, through CISA, we get the information so you'll know what's actually threatening your infrastructure as well. So we bring that back. It's like you said, there's going to be the canary in the cave where it's, hey, we're seeing this happen in this area. It may be affecting us as well. They're exploiting this vulnerability. So right now we're at the point to where we're doing exercises where we try to layer on top of maybe a National Guard level exercise occurring within a state or a region. Well, they'll bring in their industry partners and we see how that flow of information, how they're speaking to each other, and then how we can take that and push it forward. So like you said, collaboration at all levels and with our industry partners to a point to one day where we do like a national level exercise where we'll have the states running their own independent exercises with their industry partners, feed that information up so we can see how it affects us on a global scale.
Okay. So, something that's been in the news for the last couple of years, right, pretty heavy duty, is the Typhoon series of, state actor attacks. And, I think I can say, China. Okay, maybe you guys can't.
I'll say China.
Okay, so 2 out of 3. Okay, so, this is an example where I think for the practitioners in the room, right, whatever that state actor activity is or is recognized as having been, I think we would all agree that before it became public, they had been present in doing operations for a while, right? That's just the nature of, I think, state actor activity in this space. So how does collective security and collective defense, how will you guys measure success in terms of impact or timeline between what industry can see, observe, and do, and then what U.S. Cyber Command and its U.S. government, federal partners, intel community partners, how is that going to work? Like, who's going to find out first?
So I can kick it off. So let me put my intel hat on. So, again, we found Volt Typhoon and Salt Typhoon, and again, they came into the program a lot earlier and detected. So how long had they been there? So when we step back and say, all right, why are they there? What really alarmed us was the fact they were sitting in critical infrastructure. They weren't exfilling data. They weren't doing anything malicious. They were sitting there. So now that really set up the warning flags. It's kind of like, all right, why are they here? What are they doing? And part of that is when it goes overseas, they know they can't beat us platform to platform. Okay, weapon system to weapon system. So now they have to extend that. And they use a method called system destructive warfare, where it's kind of like, hey, let's find the critical nodes, go after those critical nodes to prevent me from being able to mobilize forces and move forward. So you pre-position, you set in the networks, and you wait. And so that's the really alarming part, I think, that sent up the signal. Hey, they're not trying to steal IP. They're not trying to steal data. They're sitting there pre-positioned to be disruptive. So part of that can be, as we get indication warnings overseas of movements, then we can actually start sharing that information, saying, hey, maybe you need to tighten down certain networks, certain capabilities. This is what we're seeing over here already starting to play out. Another point of collaboration is, since you are forming some of the backbone of our critical infrastructure for us when it comes to the network, is you can't fix everything. You can't secure everything. So at least we can come from our perspective of, here are some areas that we would really like and need for you to secure and harden, and understanding you'll hold the other at risk, but this is critical for our operations. And so that collaboration there really helps them focus, because otherwise you can walk in and say, hey, you need a security network. That does no one any good. And if you do take that list and start working down it, maybe necessarily what I actually need to be doing is number 12 or 13 on that list, not 1 or 2.
You know, when I think back and we think of what's happened, a couple real good things came out of the typhoons. So first off, if you look at what government did and what government published, right? There were joint advisories. There were advisories across governments, right? Across countries that were put together around this topic, sharing information at the appropriate classification level. So collectively that brought together. But I think the real lesson learned and the question coming out of all that, and back to what the general was saying, is what are we going to do going forward? So, one of the things that we talk about in the kind of the C2 ISAC and the telecoms is, well, do we need to be thinking about the fact that during a time of some type of conflict, do our networks need to go to higher assurance levels? Is there a more tangential configuration to a router that we may want to go to? So, some of the things that we're trying to work closely with government with is as we look out into the future and as the world is changing with AI complexities and AI threats and these frontier models, we have to be agile with how we're looking to future defend the country, right? So, should we be looking at different types of configurations for our edge devices and firewalls and routers during a time of conflict that can help reduce the risk associated with obviously these nation state actors that are focused off living off the land and different things like that. So I think the typhoons was a great wake up call to understand what an APT is. And then more importantly, what causes them to want to actually use whatever those beachheads that they established to achieve whatever objective that they're looking to achieve. So a lot of great lessons learned about it. And, to me, I'm more focused on what are we doing forward, right, during a time of heightened conflict, which is really, kind of the essence of. And generally, you talked about, I remember in the War College, right,
Yeah.
Center of gravity versus chasing vulnerabilities. And what you're describing, right, is they're focused on finding out what are the center of gravity, what are the issues within our country, right, that when potentially exploited, right, can help them achieve their objective, whether that be mobilization, whether that be disruption of power or other things like that.
Yeah, totally agreeing with the other point of that too. Is not so much disrupting me, but also causing friction within the country itself. Not only for a network, the problem with a lot of these exercises, we can't actually go out and turn the power off to see what the result would be. So we rely on natural disasters to see, okay, how resilient is that community when they lose power? Jackson, Mississippi lost their water infrastructure. It was due to, the construction of it, but we quickly saw that even a city as small as about 150,000 to 180 that were impacted, the monumental lift it took to provide them with clean water. So now we see, okay, take that, multiply it by 10 to 12 to 20 cities. And at the same time, let's start turning off water, ports, and everything else. So, not only think of it from a military perspective, think of it just as a domestic friction point.
Okay, so as the host announced at the beginning, right, plenty of time and opportunity for audience questions. So I'd ask you all to be spinning that up because I'm gonna run out of age-related cognizance here in a minute. Okay, listen, you guys have talked about typhoons. I asked the question: is it a was or is the typhoons an is and are?
Oh, definitely is and are.
Yeah. I mean, let's break it down. Any type of APT campaign that's associated by a nation state, right, has many different variants, right? We talk about Vault Typhoon, we talk about Salt Typhoon, right? To think that a campaign that's originated by a state actor, right? When will they stop with their campaign? Well, it just depends on their achievement. Per the general, right? It's pre-positioning and espionage, right? So when will a nation state stop trying to be successful? I wish I could tell you when that is, but I think it is and it's are. It's going to be just a constant fight every single day.
Yeah, and what we're seeing a lot of times too is the fact of even when we publicly display that you're in our network, you have done this, it really doesn't lessen the blow. They continue. And to the point where it almost feels like sometimes we've normalized intrusion. And because it happens so often and it's persistent and it's always occurring, and that's all you hear on the news is, hey, a data breach here, a data breach there. And to the point that we've normalized this, where in the cyber domain where you're not actually present, we don't consider it the same as an intrusion in the fact of if there was someone sitting in your house when you walk through the door. So,
okay, so I mean, in the interest of collective something, implied in that, I think, is that there's effect in the messaging. And so we hear about a nation state actor that not only was, but is as actively present inside infrastructure in a number of places for a number of reasons. Like, how do we take collective security, collective defense, and turn that into collective communicating? Like what needs to be done? I mean, you had a previous 4-star commander go in 60 Minutes and talk about this, and I think that was a blip that lasted for that was an overnight headline.
Yeah, I think TJ, when I started, right, the information sharing is happening. It's the action that's associated with it. So much of that is dependent upon the entity that's getting the intelligence. And in the world of AI, especially AI empowerment, we need to think about that and change that game, right? What we need to be doing, in addition to sharing intelligence, is providing entities the ability to opt in to potentially run tools, right? Verify configurations. We haven't even talked about supply chain, right? For CISOs that work for large companies, they have large budgets. When you start getting into those small and medium businesses, they really don't have the IT professionals or the IT help. So even when we go and we say, hey, you need to look for these IOCs or these TTPs, they don't maybe even understand what that is. So what I think we need to look at from the public-private standpoint, back to your question, is now the enablement. And I'll use an example. I think it was about 15 years ago, the Struts vulnerability came out, right? And it caused chaos for everybody. And I can recall, being a CISO, and my team designed 10 different ways to go find the vulnerability because it wasn't easily to be found. But there was no way for me to distribute that code and those things out to a larger entity to quickly help them be able to go find it and remediate it within their own environment. And I think that's kind of the genesis of the JCDC, right, as an example. But I would say we can't grade ourselves well yet on how are we equipping the private as well as the public sector with the tools based on the intelligence so that we can action off of it.
Okay, so the forum is the Homeland Security Defense Forum, right? So what should I selfishly, as the CISO for the state of Texas, what demand signal should I be asking the Department of Defense, the Department of War, or DHS, CISA? And what do you think the J2 at US Cyber Command ought to be able to provide?
Well, and we already worked through, Homeland Security as well as our FBI partners and that, that communication network to show them, hey, this is what we're seeing. Here's all things that we see that could affect you right now and how it's being used, their techniques, procedures. Again, that can fold into what you're talking about is now someone needs to generate the solution. How do you go find it? What does it look like? And so part of that too is, we'll spill into AI, I know, but, as we detect malware and how that malware is operating, that we can self-generate the rules base that can then go feed into the other malware detection, say, okay, it's an automated process. I don't have to sit there and configure my system for it. So it's already seeing the malware, describing what needs to be done, generates the rules. And then like he's talking about, if we can communicate that out and do a mass distribution, everyone's rule base is updated. So now everybody has that same level of protection. And we're not waiting for, how many times have you seen malware or ransomware pop up in another location because they didn't cleanse their system, they're still vulnerable?
Yes, I think what I heard you say is AI is going to solve the intergovernmental communication problem between the states and DHS and Department of Defense. Okay, I didn't say that out loud.
Exactly.
No press in the room, right? Okay, so Rich, I know there is a lawyer in the room, at least one, your lawyer, not mine. And my procurement officer is not in the room, or she told me to shut up. But what really can states ask of industry? What should we expect or hope that you can provide at scale, right? Trust, confidence, and effect aside. What does that look like?
So before I answer that, you said something. I just want to make sure. Didn't you all hear him say he's effectively the CISO for Texas?
I am.
Okay, good. Just want to make sure that I didn't.
Yeah, that's whether I want it or not, it's in the law.
That's great to know, TJ.
Yeah.
That's
I should have kept that quiet.
Yeah. That's great.
I know people now.
Exactly. So TJ, we have to change the way that we're approaching this issue, especially with AI and stuff. If you look over the last 15 years, 70% of the innovation that has come out is detective controls. Let me tell you have a problem. Let me tell you have an issue. Here's an alert. You need to go do this. And we collectively need to innovate and go more towards the preventive world. When I first started doing this in the late 1990s and firewalls and stuff came out, everything was preventive, right? It was firewalls, IDS controls. It wasn't letting me know I had a problem, it was preventing it. And we need to focus on that. So when I think about the state levels, right, and I think about the opportunities that are available, I think a preventative approach, right? The more we can do on the wire, the more we can prevent bad traffic, getting to the endpoints so that the cyber defenders have to sift through and look for the needle in the haystack, the better off we're going to be. But that needs to come through innovation. That needs to come through coordination. And then, if I was the CISO of Texas, my thought.
I know you're going to tell me what to do.
My thought would be, is I want to have some abilities to go to different levels based on what is happening in my environment, right? Because during a time of crisis, right, you got to have clear, effective communication, right, and the ability to isolate and do different things, right? So let's just say hypothetically, right, Texas gets intelligence that something bad's going to happen, someone's going to target Texas or whatever the case may be. You might want to say, hey, can we stop all domains except for texas.gov for the next 12 hours so we make sure we're collectively communicating and false information is not being introduced and different things like that. So, I think when it comes to the state levels, they have to look at and understand their critical infrastructure and have a way to have the transparency and the visibility so they can make the best risk-based decisions, as well as the ability in a time of urgency to potentially push out controls that can allow the infrastructure to continue to operate while you do with the larger crisis at hand.
Yeah, and when you expand on that with the rest of the infrastructure we're looking at, there comes a point, just like you said, where, hey, with the SCADA systems, when do we actually unplug those, run them manually? We're going to lose efficiencies. There may be interruptions, but at the same time, we want to preserve that capability. So when the threat's over, we can stand it back up. So not only, do we have those almost like a watch kind of, hey, we're going to drop to this level or next level, disconnect, run these operations, make that backup, be able, like, what's our resiliency plan now? How can we stand this back up if it does occur? So I think there's a lot of exercises states can run through. Again, it becomes the messaging because they are the pulse when it really comes to the people of, we're taking this action because of A, B, and C. And again, it gets back to the, hey, there's a foreign threat or bad actor playing in our, that has a threat on our infrastructure. We're going to have to do these line items, and here's how it's going to affect you. Put it out there first, and it really makes a difference. So.
Got it. Okay. I'm scanning the audience. Anyone got one question, one victim? Okay, for the mic runner over here, or just yell.
Well, thanks for the discussion. I had to write it down.
Is it on?
So we often hear about the need. There we go.
Yep.
We often hear about the need to share cyber threat information, but sharing information is only useful if it helps organizations act faster together. And you've alluded to it, but what do you see are the biggest barriers that still prevent government and industry from turning shared cyber threat information into coordinated action before attackers can spread across network sectors or jurisdictions?
Again, from my perspective, when I look at large enterprises, right, I think the sharing is there. Small to medium businesses is where I think the biggest gap is, right? Because again, if you are Susie's Sandwich Shop, right, who's your IT person, right? Or if you're a middle-sized business, you may not have that, and you may not have that connectivity back into the different information sharing elements that are there. We have multitudes of information sharing. Most states have them, right? Industry sectors have them. All these different entities are there. And again, from where I sit over the last 20 years, we have really improved on that capability. But the challenge still is do you have the team and the expertise then to turn around and action it? That's where I think our biggest opportunity is now with the whole private public partnership is how do we action off of that?
Yeah, same. When you're talking about this, municipalities as well, where the CISO is the IT who is everything all involved. There's one computer running the water system. And so even though you've said, hey, there's vulnerability here, how do I know that's been patched? Because I only need one vector to get in there and affect that system. And I think it's really going to become yes, we shared the information. You don't want to fall back on we told them, and it still occurs. So it's kind of like, how do we have that feedback mechanism to say, hey, we've been patched, or guess what? We just took it offline because we don't have that capability. So we're just going to take this piece of infrastructure offline, run it manually until you tell me this threat's over, or I can go in and affect it.
Okay, I'm going to have a follow-up to that, but looking for a hand for anybody who wants the next question. Okay, so you talked about having a team. Mm-hmm. Okay, so how, which I think means not just process and technology and coordinated action, but it's also people, right? So how between the mobilization system for the
Right.
J2 and for industry, who has a very large team with your company, like how does state, local, federal government take advantage of that team? How can we mobilize your expertise in advance of a need or crisis?
So first off, we actually do participate in some of the government exercises, right? So we actually do that. Where I think we have an opportunity is if we understand what government or military obstacles are in place, we may have a unique ability to provide the data, right? Obviously through the appropriate legal forums to help them solve that. Oftentimes we don't necessarily know what an issue is. So, and I'll try to give a real tangible example, right? So mobile proxies, right? So in a telecommunication environment, mobile proxies in general seem to be used in a fashion that is not of good nature, right? Bad actors can use them. Well, I wouldn't necessarily know that unless the government were to go and tell me, hey, we see that, predominantly these mobile proxies are used. Is there something you all can do, right? And we can actually go engineer, right? We can actually go do something to potentially help solve those issues. But, I don't think government or Department of War thinks like that. Like, hey, we know this is a platform, right? Again, I'm going back to center of gravity. The center of gravity is they're using this platform. They're using it for all these different bad activities. But if we can dissolve the platform, if we can eliminate the attack surface or secure the attack surface so they can't use it anymore, then we address issues, right? So I think that's where, from a collective defense standpoint, is still another opportunity is if we understood the problems better, we might be able to. Sometimes we can't, right, TJ? And you and I were talking about this before, right? So we're now in this frontier model era, right? Well, we all know we got to do better jobs patching and all those things. But you know what? As with everything we've always done as cyber professionals, it's all about driving the costs up to the adversary, right? So what if we're able to figure out to identify frontier model like traffic that is attacking an organization, and can you then put that into a honeypot and burn up all the tokens, make it very expensive for somebody to do that? If that is a driving force that can help, right, then that's something collectively, right, we might be able to figure out how to do, right? So again, knowing the problem, we might be able to help solve.
Thought on people?
Yeah. So when it comes to like domestic operations, so Title 32, that's the National Guard. So we have cyber protection teams, and what they can do a lot of times is, like you said, these small organizations, they can come in and assist with that as well. So sometimes they'll perform like the same job as a contact team. They come in, especially for small organizations, they'll assist them, especially if they have a state requirement on top of that. They'll help state systems, and that becomes your domestic contact team and allows us to operate inside the U.S. So we've used that a lot of times when it comes to cyber infrastructure failures, as well as part of the planning of, hey, if a cyber event does occur, have these on ready so we can actually plug them where needed, so we can actually bolster the response. So that's one way that we can help domestically. And like I said, taking that forward and doing best practices as well. When it comes to defend forward, meaning outside the U.S., this is where cybercom gets involved, where you said, hey, there is a node or a nexus of bad actors coming out of this location. Let us go forward, take down that network so it can no longer affect us as U.S. And so that's how you start seeing the federal play. And then, like I said, always sharing with Homeland Security. When we're operating domestically, we're always in support. So we'll be protecting or supporting some other federal organization.
Mike over here.
Hi, Colin Suter from Deloitte. Thank you for the discussion this morning. Very, very interesting. I wanted to maybe just go back to something that Rich had said earlier about, and kind of in terms of shutting things down. If we think about reverting back to something that's of higher assurance than before, makes me wonder, have we as an industry maybe over-indexed on zero trust as a concept in terms of saying it's binary, it's zero trust or nothing? I'm thinking about if you've got elevated trust levels when we've all gone out and bought a boatload of zero trust, right? How do you get that gradation in there that allows you to adjust accordingly and commensurate with the actual threat that's at hand?
Yeah, I mean, look, zero trust principles, I think, are very, very sound. And realistically, it's really high assurance, right? You can choose whatever description you want to occur, right? But you're getting an assurance level that the person on the other end is who they say they are. The machine on the other end is who they say they are. I mean, those are all great fundamental cybersecurity practices that may not have been necessarily, implemented as we've gone through this transition from traditional networks to cloud to now AI. We haven't done a good job, learning from our mistakes. If I give you an example, if we go back to the late 1990s when firewalls first came out, they were shipped wide open, right? And then people quickly realized that that's a bad thing. Let's ship it closed, right? Fast forward, we jumped to from the internet to the next biggest thing, which was cloud, right? And then and think cloud, S3s, when they came out, how were they? They were wide open. Now what are they? Wide shut. And so now we jump to AI, right? So now we have AI being distributed. Is the AI secure or is the AI wide open, right? So it's kind of funny, like we see history kind of repeating itself all the way through. So, zero trust principles, I think, are sound, and we need to implement as many as we can. But I look at it as really higher levels of assurance. That's what zero trust principles gives me.
Okay. Over here.
Hi, thanks. Meng Wang from SAIC. Was at another conference yesterday and heard a panelist talk about a part of the resilience plan around critical infrastructure build out is enabling the particular infrastructure, the sector, to run independent of others. Water without energy, energy without comms. Just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
I have not heard that myself. I start thinking about it from an engineering standpoint. Listen, independence is great for resilience, but I don't know how realistically you could do that per se. Guess it would depend. But I've never heard that as a strategy as of yet.
Sorry to ignore you. I'm pointing over here and I'm ignoring a whole side of the room. So, again, what he's talking about, it's so interlaid. It's kind of like, I find it difficult to be able to separate those items unless you can have self-powered generation for your own water treatment, or, when you think about it, power pretty much runs the world. So how do I maintain other critical infrastructure without access to that power? And if I look at the national power grid, except for Texas, who's on independent, how do I start separating myself and parsing out that power grid in a fact of, okay, certain areas may black out, but where's my power generation source coming from and how do I re-network that? So, we've talked about it, but at the same time, a lot of these capabilities that we have, especially there's a small area called Camp Shelby, Mississippi, who has their own power generation if they need to. They can go completely off the grid. They have a closed loop fiber network. They're starting to think that if I have to exist as a small city by myself, how do I do it? When I start trying to apply that across the entire, nation, there's a lot more infrastructure we have to create to do that, I think.
Okay, scanning for additional questions. Okay, here in the center. And then, ma'am, back to you.
Morning, Ryan Madden from Dev Technology. Thanks for being here today. Getting to the frontier model topic, obviously we had the release of Mythos yesterday with some restrictions, and there's a lot of focus on the July 1st date for the next release of Mythos without those restrictions, as I understand it. What are the preparations that government and industry, or the government is doing, and that industry can help with as we look at these frontier models? Like right now it's Mythos, but a couple months it'll be something else, and how can we all support that?
So again, if you start thinking about how it operates, basically we're taking vulnerabilities that's able to do, multiple branches and sequels very rapidly. That's basically the gain you're getting out of this of, hey, I want to get from point A to point B. Give me 1,000 ways I can get there by using these vulnerabilities and stacking them. And so, again, it comes back to where on these priority lists do you have understanding your own networks, understanding your own systems, understanding your own vulnerabilities, and start working on a plan to at least hey, can I interrupt that mid node because I fixed that one vulnerability I knew I had? And so you prioritize them in the sense of, okay, what's my easiest fix and what's the one that's going to give me the biggest bang for my buck? And so I think that's really how the approach is going to be now. Part of that is everybody's worried about the threat. I'd also flip it on its head saying, hey, let's use this for good. Point it at your own system and let it generate that list of vulnerabilities. And that kind of gives you your roadmap on, hey, this is how I'm going to fix my portion of the pie.
You know, and I think it may present a great opportunity for collective defense as we talk about, and as TJ says, you know, what that might be. I mean, there could be opportunities for industries, right, or cross government, like clearinghouse concepts, right, which can address these issues. I think we have to realize some of this can't be done and completed by each individual entity just because of costs and clarity. So I think there may be some opportunities because of AI and these frontier models to do a larger collective clearinghouse, industry-led type of things that, again, you know, as we say, test once, satisfy many, maybe solve once, satisfy many. But again, it goes back to how then when we distribute those solutions out to entities and their ability to digest and apply them.
Yeah. And I'd add to that too, and you know, maybe it becomes a product of insulation, meaning you deal with some very small carriers out there that's still part of your enterprise. And it's kind of like, all right, well, if I can fix mine and have them surrounded and protected, it's at least harder for them to be an attack vector. So, you know, industry using, you know, large industry using their might can protect the small ones until they can shore up.
Okay, I'm keeping an eye on Megan to see if we're going to get the hook anytime soon, but okay, good to go. All right. Okay, another question. Yep.
Eileen Rubin, DHS. Okay, Eileen Rubin, DHS. So a problem that we see a lot is we're the government, we're here to help. And that's everyone in industry's favorite phrase. And you talked a lot about coordinating with industry, getting information out, sharing information. How do we pre-build those connections so that when something happens, there's already a community there to share information, to know who to go to? Like we've spoken with people in some of the projects I've worked on where they say, I don't even know where to go. Like I know I'm being attacked, but I'm not even sure how to go about it. And I know you talked a little about the ISAC and other industry working groups, but how do we as a government, as a community, kind of build on those connections ahead of time so that as we're going on the offensive, we have that foundation to work on?
Yeah, it's a challenging question because, you know, the way we're constructed, you know, you've got local and state law enforcement agencies and information sharing centers. You have the FBI, all right. You have you know, the CCC through NSA. You have CISA. You have CISA people in the things, and we value the trust related to the personal relationship. And quite honestly, that may not be the best way for things to work. You know, my vote would be is we should have the easy button, right? Somebody shouldn't have to sit there and say, wait a minute, this particular issue, whatever. So I'm just going to pick on cyber. Cyber's pretty clear, a little bit different than physical, right? But for cyber, you know, it would be great to have the easy cyber button. Like it's like that show, was it Night Watchman? He picks the phone up, right? One person, you know, picks the phone up, or even AI, right, can do it. We go to one location, and then from there, it dishes it out appropriately to where to go. Now, you know, having had the opportunity to serve in the Bureau and other locations, right? Well, the Bureau immediately is going to go into law enforcement protective, which is going to prevent them from necessarily sharing while they develop their case, right? And if you go to another entity, they're restricted by their authorities and they don't want to share. So, you know, I've thought about this a lot. The easiest thing is from the private sector, we need the easy button, and then the government needs to figure out what's the appropriate dissemination from that, because it is frustrating sometimes when you share information and it takes, let's just say, 2 weeks before one entity in the government actually gets it, because that other government entity had to do whatever they need to do, which is all fairness to them, by the way. So to me, I'm hoping one day we'll have the easy button.
Yeah, same. And hopefully, like, you know, when I have information, how do I share it and get it to you? And again, there's certain certain hurdles we have to cross and coordination we make through Homeland Security. And like I said, maybe with some of the dissemination tools that are coming out, we can quickly, pull out the nuggets that we need, that we can legally provide, share those over Homeland Security, and again, distribute that. As far as the how do we actually do that flow and everything? Again, these exercises we're trying to do right now, like a cyber guard is what Cybercom's big exercise is, and trying to layer those so we can see, hey, if the flow of information isn't working correctly, what do we change with our authorities, or what do we change with our policy to enable that? So that probably one of the better things that come out of exercise is when we look domestically and we build that back up, is the fact of, okay, what needs to change? Did this work? Yes or no? And if not, let's get it changed. Because again, changing policy authorities, that takes time. So.
Okay, so I love your idea about the easy button, Rich. So I'm just saying to both of you, whether it's Cybercom J2 or your firm, happy to have you guys come to Texas and help us build the easy button. And then I'll be great. Okay, any other question in the audience, please? You got it. In the back, yep.
But if it was Texas, it would be a big button.
It would be a big button.
Good morning, guys.
And
My
it
name
would
is
have a spur on it. Go Spurs.
Good morning, guys. My name is Amon Kunlis. I'm with Everforth ECS. I had a quick question. So on the same thread of information sharing, you guys have mentioned CISA, which has services and teams like JCDC and AIS for some of these functions. From your guys' perspective, what gaps do you guys see with broader government information sharing at scale and collaboration in this private-public partnership space that's really limiting collective defense to drive forward a collaborative operational integration? And where do you see government and industry needing to go in that space?
So first off, there's a tremendous amount of information that's to see, and there's a lot there. I think that the challenge, just like the previous question, is when you respond to that information, and I can't remember if it's PD 42 or 41, right? There's a presidential directive out there that equates to where information from a cyber standpoint needs to originate and go through. The challenge is, because of the way all the entities work, they don't share amongst themselves, right? So today, if you're sharing information with the CCC, they can't necessarily share it with CISA and the FBI. And if you share it with the FBI and it becomes law enforcement sensitive because you're looking on an active case, there may be a delay before they can share it out to the larger enterprise. So, I think there could be an opportunity to review how those information flows work, right? And I don't know if you want to call it an SLA, right? But how long can somebody usually sit on information before they share it out to the larger enterprise? But again, the information is there. When we provide information to the government, does it get dispersed appropriately through the government in a timely fashion? I would say, from where I sit, the answer to that is no, right? But again, I want to stress there is plenty of information sharing coming from the government through the various avenues that exist today, right? Everything from, I said, the state ISACs to the NSA CCC to InfraGuard program to the FBI, through the various CISA programs, even Secret Service has theirs. So everybody has an entity and they are sharing. But is it a collective sharing, meaning everybody on the same page? I don't think so, not this time.
So looking at that standpoint, I want to take his side, where it's kind of like, we need to develop better protections when you do share information. So instead of sitting and holding that information, hey, we've had a breach, we've had a data compromise, you're trying to shore up, protect yourself before you release that information out. And so we need to have better protections for industry, I think, to enable them to share it faster, knowing that there'll be no repercussions coming back or other standpoints, unless they're negligent. But for the most part, they want to do the right thing. They want to share the information. So we need to facilitate that.
By the way, agree 100%. My view is the other direction.
Yep.
Not going for much.
Yep.
But yeah.
So I approached it his side, he approached it my side. So
Okay, additional questions, please? Not seeing any. Okay.
Let me wrap with one thing too, is, we talked about, hey, how do you facilitate some of these conversations, everything else? Is forums like this, because now I know who I'm going to pick up the phone and call when we have an incident. And, it's again, we talked about the personal relationships. That is important. Not only is it the standards, the processes and everything else, but now bringing us together, because, before frontier models, we wouldn't have had the same discussion 6 months ago. Probably 2 years ago, we would be having the same discussion where you had DOW speaking with industry directly saying, here are my needs. So,
Rich, I just think I heard him say you're screwed.
yep.
But can you funnel it through the state of Texas?
Oh,
first?
yeah.
Exactly.
I'd appreciate that. Anything you want to share directly from the Cybercom J2, I'm happy to get it. Okay, so I know we're wrapping up. We're inside a couple minutes. Look, we've talked about the last 10 to 15 years. We've talked about a lot of data being shared. 3 years ago, I don't think 4 years ago, we were not talking about AI. We were certainly not talking about frontier AI. I would ask you guys to be very speculative. What does 5 years from now look like? Tell me what 2032 looks like when it comes to cybersecurity and the relationships between industry and government. And who's going to be ahead, the adversary or collective defense?
I believe if we keep our foot on the pedal, we will be ahead of the adversaries, or at least in an even playing field. Right now, the adversary has the upper hand because of speed of execution and the tools that are available to them. But when I look at how things are changing as a cybersecurity defender and cyber professional, right? I think, all these different frontier models and future AI models and even quantum resistant algorithms, when adapted properly, are actually make us better. Like, right now we're in trouble, open source code bases, but you know what? Using these frontier models going forward, we will have the best secure code that we've ever had. Right? If we're using it in pre-production before it gets there, and we're doing constant assurance checking along the way. If we drive innovation to prevent bad and bad actions from occurring, it's only going to make the job as a cyber professional be that much, more effective in what we're doing. So I'm really excited by AI. From the application. Are we going through a bubble time frame where the bad actor has the advantage? Absolutely. But when you think you said 5 years from now, I see AI fighting AI. I see, as a cyber professional, using AI to close that speed gap. I see AI giving me visibility and transparency like I've never had before. But most importantly, I actually see it doing and helping us with better governance, because it should be very easy to make sure we're looking at compliance checks and different things like that. So the next 3 years, TJ, are going to be bloody. But if you're talking about 5 years, by the way, we don't have a choice. We have to rise to the occasion. And I think we will.
Okay. John?
Same. You stole most of my fire there, but same. I see us being very well protected 5 years from now, because what's making the news right now is the vulnerability piece and what it can actually do in attack. Because that makes great news. What we're not looking at is, like I said, when you flip it on its head and you start providing the protection, you start closing those holes. Because as we're able to purge networks, purge critical infrastructure using AI, it closes that attack surface for the adversary. And so we end up with a chance and they're going to see that window closing too. So at least, if anything, it makes them spend more, put themselves at risk, and actually overextend trying to get into a system that is now 1,000 times harder. And so as we harden those networks, we can see where we have the gaps and we put our concentration there. So 5 years from now, great. Next year or two, yes, it's going to be a fight as we're trying to defend and protect as we build up those resources. But I was talking to one expert the other day, and he's like, yeah, but part of this too is the amount of money that has to be spent for these frontier models. So we're still looking at nation states, very highly paid criminal organizations that can actually afford to develop these models to come after us. So we can limit that down to a number of adversaries to where we can say, okay, we understand they'll have the capability. This one we're not so worried about. So, you know, Brandon Haynie with his personal Claude account is not going to go out and figure out how to hack NSA, right? So we can actually narrow down that threat vector, know where it's coming from, and again, look and see where those pulses are coming out of.
Okay, to both of you, thank you very, very much for having the conversation and being part of the dialogue. I think my takeaway is the difference between the bloody 3 and the happy 5 is a whole bunch of coulda, shoulda, and woulda. So there you go. All right, fellas, thank you very much.
Please join me in thanking our panel.